We will be starting in just a few minutes. To everyone watching the replay, thank you. Make sure to add a comment and mention me so that I can reply after the fact. If you're watching on Facebook, please make sure to press play on the video so that if you leave a comment, we will be able to put it on the screen. Hello, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Sree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest this morning is Sarah Bahr. You can follow her on Twitter and Instagram at smbar14. She's a senior staff editor on the New York Times Flexible Editing Desk. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer, and I'll be guest hosting today. Sree's Sunday New York Times Read Along is produced by Digimentors in partnership with Scroll and Scroll Global, one of India's most important independent websites. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and our Digimentors website. Please like, comment, share, retweet, do all the things you do on social media to make sure people know about this show. We're also live on Scroll's Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter accounts. So thank you so much, Scroll. We really appreciate the partnership. As I mentioned, we have Sarah Bahr on this week, and I can't tell you how excited I am to have her on this show. It really is. I mean, I'm excited about a lot of our guests and a lot of our shows, but sometimes, some guests are just particularly exciting. She writes it's not even her day job. She's on the flexible editing desk, but she also writes articles for arts, culture, and style. And she's written numerous articles for Times Insider. And if you read the Times Insider column about her interviews with Times journalists, that's exactly how I feel about this show. So I just can't wait to have her. In addition to that article that's referenced on the top left, we'll also take a look at a few of her other recent articles. She tagged along with a reporter covering the Thanksgiving Day parade. She interviewed the actress who does the voice of Moana. She also wrote a Sunday routine column, which is always interesting to read and only available in the Metro section. There are two articles that are not mentioned on this graphic. One is about the Sunset Boulevard, a Broadway show that has an outdoor sequence at the end, and she takes us behind the scenes there. And she also has a great article about New York City's holiday window displays, which I remember looking at when I was a kid, when I grew up. I grew up in New York, of course. So I am just thrilled to have her on the show today. Sree's Sunday New York Times Read Along is, of course, produced by Digimentors, the social, digital, AI, and events consultancy that Sree founded several years ago. Thank you to Muckrack for your longtime sponsorship of the show. We really appreciate your support for all the things that Sree has done over the years, and in particular for the New York Times Read Along. And next week, make sure you join us. Deb Amlin, a columnist for the New York Times Games section, will be our guest. She helps readers learn to solve the Times crossword. She'll share what she's learned after writing nearly 5,000 articles and columns for the Times. We have such a great show planned for today. Again, my name is Neil Parekh. I will be the guest host for today's show. Sarah Bahr is our guest. We will welcome some of our viewers and thank people for watching, of course, as we usually do. But I want to jump right in because there is breaking news from the New York Times that we want to get to. This is one of those occasions where the print edition is just a little bit behind what's happening in real life. If you didn't catch the news, Assad has fled Syria. This was posted just this morning as I was prepping for the show. Yesterday, we had I was watching the news. There were rebel advances, and the map was changing. And then all of a sudden, the Russian Foreign Ministry announced that Assad has fled, and the rebels claim Damascus. So we will check in on that later. But breaking news for you, and it's something to keep an eye on. One of the challenges, of course, when you focus on print, you also need to look at the online edition to see what's happening and what's changing. Let's go ahead and welcome some of the folks. Say hi to some of the folks who are watching today. We have Doug Levy watching from San Francisco. Good morning, Doug. Always great to have you join us. And I know this is what you do. You get up early as a longtime, not old, a longtime radio hand, but it is 5:30 in the morning in California, assuming that's where Doug is and where he usually is. Thank you so much for getting early. Jonathan is watching from the East Village, where he's also updating his website, Flamenco in New York. Make sure you check that out. Ken Fisher is watching from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Ken, thank you for joining us. And my weekly wave to my mom. Hi, Mom. She's not watching from Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. She's in Tampa, Florida. She just got there last night. And she gave me permission to share this. It's her birthday today. So please do me a favor and give her a quick shout out. Say happy birthday to my mom. And thank you so much. Sorry, she goes to Florida over the winter, and we can't be with her on her birthday, but at least I get to give her a shout out and say happy birthday on air. Sashi is watching from Potomac, Maryland. Sashi, thank you so much. Gunther is watching from Austria. Good afternoon over there. And it's, of course, evening in India, where we have a number of people watching through our partnership with Scroll. Ron Thomas is watching from Margate, New Jersey. Ron, so great to have you. I had the pleasure of seeing Ron when I was in Dubai a few weeks ago. Our schedules didn't line up exactly during the week I was there, but I did get to meet him at the gate in the lounge for Emirates Airlines. We both had 2 a.m. flights. So I met him around midnight or 1 o'clock. We hung out for a bit. Ron, it was great to see you. A longtime friend of the show, was a guest several years ago, just before COVID, at Sree's place. And I think it was the first time I'd met him in person, which is always interesting. Chris Gorman is watching from New York, New York. Thank you, Chris, for saying good morning. Patricia is also watching from New York. Paula Kiger, longtime producer of the show, is watching from Tallahassee, Florida. Thank you, Paula. And Jonathan says when he was a child, the Christmas window display started at Bloomingdale's and continued downtown, mostly along Fifth Avenue, until it ended at Gimbel's. Absolutely. Now, I don't remember the details of seeing, but I know my parents took me down and we lined up to see the displays, but I don't remember which stores. Patricia is saying welcome to Sarah. We have Shefali Patel watching from Charlotte, North Carolina. Shefali, nice to meet you. I think it's the first time I've seen you comment. Thank you for watching. Melissa is watching on YouTube from Cambridge, Massachusetts, which means she's not out on the water this morning. So Melissa, thank you. Melissa was recently a guest on the show as well. Deborah is saying hi. She's in Brooklyn this week. Thank you for watching from Brooklyn. Doug says it's his favorite way to start Sundays. And Ken does get partial credit. It is 7:30 in Iowa. Thank you. And Mohammed is watching from Pakistan. Thank you, Mohammed. And Pradina is watching from Silver Spring. And the birthday greetings came in. Jonathan said happy birthday to my mom, as did Patricia. And my mom says thank you for that. So thank you very much for joining in that. And now, without further ado, I want to bring on Sarah Bahr. Again, so excited to have her on the show. We're going to cover a lot of the articles she's had in both today's paper and last week's paper, and some older articles as well. But without further ado, let's bring on Sarah Bahr. Sarah, thank you.
Good morning.
I am so excited to have you on the show today. I love doing this show. I've gotten to interview some of my heroes growing up, just some sports columnists and people whose bylines I read. But I always make a special point of watching and reading the Times Insider column, and that's not even your day job. So we'll get to that in a second. But Sarah is a senior editor on the Flexible Editing Desk, and in her spare time, she writes articles for the Times focusing on arts, culture, style, and has written a number of Times Insider columns, which we'll get to in just a moment. But Sarah, first, for our viewers, can you tell us a little bit about your work on the Flexible Editing Desk? What does that entail exactly?
Yeah, so basically we're kind of a one-stop shop for editing from across the newsroom. So every story at the Times before it publishes gets 2 edits. So we're usually doing a second edit, which is more of kind of a line edit on stories, but we handle breaking news from the politics world, the science world, the foreign affairs world, and we also handle features like the wordplay and the crossword column. We do Instagram captions, videos, all kinds of formats, not just traditional articles as well. So we're really kind of, it requires being a well-read person and kind of knowing what's going on across the breadth of the report and really keeping up with world and current events in a variety of genres and beats. And yeah, it's always exciting because no day is ever the same.
And you, when you do your editing, it's for the online sections, right?
It's mostly for online content. Occasionally, we'll also get print cuts of stories before they go to the paper at night. But mostly, it's online content.
And you did actually work with the Print Hub for about 3 months. You wrote a column about that. What was the big difference between editing for print versus editing online? For online.
So editing for print, I mean, you're really thinking about like what someone will see first, and also really giving them context. Because in that case, headline writing is especially different. Like there are a whole bunch of rules that govern print headlines that I just never been exposed to because my college didn't have a print newspaper, so I actually kind of learned how to do print at the Times, which is backwards from how it would normally work. But yeah, you're definitely thinking about presentation and making sure that people have all the context that they need to understand something that maybe lives, separately. Like when you're online, you might have something that's part of a live blog. So when you're editing it, you might need to, create like a little less context built in because it's living as part of a blog that people can see, like a pen post at the top. So you don't need to give context every single time you edit a new post. But with print, it's a standalone story. So you have to make sure, like for instance, that if it's the United Healthcare CEO being, attacked or something, you want to make sure that you put that, high up in the story. And because if it's just a post that lives in a blog, maybe you don't mention that in every single post. Like if there's just a bio of him, maybe you don't mention the attack in that because it lives in a blog that already has that. But when you're looking at something for print, you have to make sure that like all the details for the story overall are in this one story. So it's kind of sometimes like taking yourself out and pretending you haven't been editing stories for a blog all day and thinking about like, if I was coming across this story for the first time, what are all these details that I would need to have in here?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I've noticed in terms of, the interplay between the print headlines and the online headlines is that, often if it's an article that has a jump, right? It goes from the front page inside. Obviously, the headline on the front page has to be shorter. It's constrained by space, and you're limited. But you might have a longer headline inside, and often that longer headline is actually the same headline that is on the online article. I don't know if that's much of a rule, or if that's a standard, or if that's just something I've noticed from time to time.
I mean, it's always great when the online headline works. A lot of times it is, longer than fits in print, especially on the front page when you have those columns and you have someone that has a really long last name. It's like, well, their last name is not going in there. So sometimes you have to be creative to kind of work around what fits.
Sure. So let's go ahead and start. I want to take a look at several of the articles you've written recently, and it was actually, almost I felt a little bit of a tinge of almost regret because we didn't do a show last weekend because it was Thanksgiving weekend, and I saw like you had a number of articles in last week's edition, last week's print paper. I'm like, oh man, we missed like 3 great articles, but you have like 3 more articles in this week's paper, so it was all good, and we get to go back and look at some of the PDFs. Let's take a look at the first article, that really the one that got our attention in terms of your work covering New York Times, talking to New York Times writers for the Insider column. I think that was back in October, if I'm not mistaken. That's the one that really got our attention. We read that and like, wow, we need to have her on the show. I was tickled when I saw that. So let me go ahead and pull that up and zoom in. So it appeared on page 2 as Times Insider, one reporter, 100 behind the scenes stories. And we'll try and zoom in a little bit. So tell us a little bit about your work. You've been writing the Times Insider column for a couple of years now, right?
Yeah, since I was a culture reporting fellow, so that would have been since I think my first one was in 2020. So it's been several years now.
Yeah, this is for the past 4 years, and you describe it. I mean, it's great. I've been the audience for a series of master classes delivered by more than 200 of the best minds in journalism, and I emphasize that because that's how our friend Ron Thomas describes this show, as a master class every week. You called out several reporters in this piece, including a longtime columnist for the magazine who's spoken with celebrities, a photographer, Adam Ferguson. But I want to specifically call out Dan Barry, who is a longtime features writer for the Times, and he has been a guest on the show. We are great fans of Dan's. He has written a number of great articles. You wrote that he showed you the magic-making potential of refining stories by reading them aloud, each extra long sentence suddenly clanging like a cowbell on the set of A Quiet Place. Tell us about that conversation with him.
Yeah, that was for a Times Insider I did. This was kind of one of my weird ideas for insiders. Sometimes I have these, and I'm always glad when my editors are game for them. But it was about journalists, read their stories aloud as part of their editing process, which was something that kind of went back to I worked in my college's writing center, and that was something that we did when we had people come in, is we would read their work aloud, because it really helps you, hear it differently and kind of gives you a different perspective. So I was curious, especially among longtime reporters, whether anyone at the Times kind of also did that as part of their editing process. Obviously, it's something that comes more into play when you're a features writer like Dan is. Like if you're reporting on breaking news, you're not like taking the time probably to read your story aloud. But when you're really thinking about flow, and you're someone like Dan that thinks about craft so much when you're writing these stories and wanting to make sure that like every word sounds right, I was like, I wonder if, he's reading these aloud, because if you read a Dan Barry story, it's like poetry. I mean, they just roll off the page, his words and his prose. And it turns out that he did, and he'd been doing this for a long time. And I mean, there are others at the Times that do this too. that I talked to for the story, but he in particular was really interesting just because like he found the practice of reading his stories aloud so valuable. And it really helped him, decide what should go in, what sounds like superfluous. And it helps you cut a story. It helps you see like if there's something that's missing. It helps you see if there's a sentence that goes on forever and ever and you like don't always notice until you read it aloud and you're like, wow, like I need a breath here. I can't make it through this sentence without. So yeah, I mean, that was a really fascinating conversation to just think about, how his stories come together. Because when we talk about journalism, we don't always talk about, the craft of features. We talk about like sourcing, especially at some place like the Times, and like how we got the story and how we went and talked to all these people and got scoops. But there's also for features in the magazine and for the stuff that Dan writes, there's a big craft element too. So it was really fun to talk to him about something that journalists don't get to talk about as much.
Absolutely. Another interesting piece you did was interviewing Eden Weingart, and I'm highlighting that section right there. An art director for the team that produced the much beloved animated athletes during the 2024 Olympics, laid out the inspirations, including Animal Crossing, that went into a single sound effect. That's an incredible detail. I remember seeing those animations during the Olympics to show like the swimmers going back and forth, etc. What was that like to talk with Eden?
Sometimes you get a little detail like that when you're having these Times Insider conversations that you're just like, oh, that's amazing, or that has to go in, or that's fascinating. But yeah, those little swimmers, they became a big thing on TikTok and on our social platforms this year. It was just a really cool way to kind of think about how to show these races without using the actual footage from the games, which was kind of restricted. So yeah, it's another instance of there are all these jobs at the Times now that aren't just like reporter and editor. There are, there's a whole game studio now. There are people that do sound. There are people that write music for the Daily. There are all these journalism jobs that are under the Times umbrella that you would just never think of as being traditional journalism that are now part of the Times. And it's exciting because with Times Insider, I can talk to these people that, have backgrounds that are totally different from mine, that don't always have journalism backgrounds, that are collaborating with people who have these traditional backgrounds to kind of create these new and exciting story formats. And Times Insider is kind of the chance to figure out, how all this comes together and how they're doing things that, I have no idea how they do these things until I ask them about it. So it's a really cool opportunity to, ask people any question that you can think of. That's kind of always my mindset when I'm doing a Times Insider is, I can ask this person like any question that I have and, they'll answer it. So I'm always grateful when people take the time to talk to me and kind of to take me behind the scenes of this really cool work that they're doing that isn't happening at, other places in America that have like the Times has so many resources. And it's such a privilege to get to talk to people about how all these people from different desks and departments are collaborating with these unique backgrounds that aren't traditional journalism.
And what you just described is really how I describe Sree's Sunday New York Times read along. So this is probably like a meta moment because we are talking to someone who writes the Times Insider columns about the Inside the Times. I mean, we've interviewed Shreya Sinha, for example, with the New York Times from the audio team. We interviewed Andrew Doss, who is the editor on the sports desk. It was last year or maybe even 2 years ago when he was covering the World Cup, and he was giving us the background on how his team covered the actual the games and how they traded off and went to the stadium and came back. So everything you just described is really how I approach this show and what I think about the show. Now, granted, we interviewed a number of people from the Times. We also interview authors and nonprofit leaders and others. But when we do interview folks from the Times, that's the same mindset that I take. Is how can we give our viewers an inside look at how articles are put together, how sections are put together, particularly like after the elections, we looked at how the front pages were designed, and went in, saw the sketches and what the thinking was, what the planning process was like, and of course we've had Tom Jolly on the show several times, the print editor of the Times. I mean, talk about giving us an inside look. It's exactly what I think of, and you put it really well in your article. where these conversations for articles I wrote that appeared in this space, the story behind the story, what we lovingly call Times Insider. In Times Insider, we explain Times journalism through interviews with reporters, editors, photographers, designers, and others who produce it, which is a great description of the show that we do as well. So, and you say that you love your job. I think that's it comes through in the writing, and it comes through in kind of telling people's stories. I mean, it's not just and you do, and this is the great thing, right? Your day job is as on the flexible editing desk, but you also write arts, culture, style section stories. But you take that reporting kind of mindset to your colleagues at the Times and kind of report on their work, which again I think is incredible. Let's look at some of the other work that you've done. I could probably talk about Times Insider all day, but in today's paper, and we'll take a look at the print section. But I want to bring this up quickly. This actually we won't be in the print section since I live in DC. Your Sunday routine piece with Catherine Russell. Have you written other Sunday routine pieces, right?
Oh yes, definitely. But it's it's not always the case that you find someone who's a gem like Catherine Russell, who's one of those extraordinary, ordinary New Yorkers, which is really kind of what the column is all about. So this was definitely a fun one.
So she has been on it's an off-Broadway play, if I'm not mistaken, but for how many years now?
37 years. She actually, they celebrated 15,000 performances on Thursday, but she's been out of the show for, 4 of them. So technically it was, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's this weekend for her. But yeah, she's been in the show for 15,000 performances, which is, wow. I mean, because she does, as I mentioned in that column, all these other things. Like she manages a restaurant. She teaches, 6 days a week. And she's managing the theater center, which has 4 shows, and she's running the box office, and and I mean, this is like on top of her being on stage 8 times a week, which is, enough for one person. So,
and granted, those 4 times that she missed the show early in its run was for weddings for her siblings. So that I think you called her the Cal Ripken of Broadway, which is incredible. I think she goes well beyond Cal Ripken's streak. Is there anyone? Have you seen anyone else? And I'm trying to remember. I think there was. I can't remember the context, but like, have you seen anyone else with that kind of a streak, that kind of longevity in the work they do?
There are people that are like that'll go through a Broadway run and like not miss a show, but like I haven't come across someone who for 37 years. I mean, she was telling me too, she's like, when I'm teaching, like I come to every class, like I don't miss any days when I'm teaching either. Like I don't take any sick days or vacation days. So it's just this kind of remarkable commitment to not just a show, but I mean the work she's doing, like she's raising money for this other theater project that she's doing. And she has all these plates that are spinning, and she's an off-Broadway person for life. So it's really inspiring to just see that commitment to one facet of her life, or several facets that fall into this one bucket. So I really haven't encountered someone that's been, that committed for that long.
Sure. I want to bring in a couple of comments. Chris actually shared this earlier, and I'm coming back to it. I'm looking forward to hearing Sarah's perspective. He worked with you on a great story you wrote about the rediscovery of a William Edmondson sculpture back in 2021 for arts. Chris works at, and I can't remember which museum it is. Chris, please put it in the comments. I am blanking. I can't call. I know you worked with Sree at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but I can't remember which museum is that right now. So, Chris, let us know if you don't mind. Appreciate that. Diane's, we said hi to Diane earlier. Let's see who else. So, Stefan joined us from Ramsey, New Jersey. A little late to the show, but always here. Happy holidays to everyone. And Ron said thank you for the shout out for meeting him at Dubai Airport. Yes, we did have a great time chatting. He's heading back to Saturday for a 1-week client assignment. He's always traveling, which is always great. Patricia Freudenberg has a question for you, Sarah. She goes, who would you say was the most influential in your career? Who was a big influence on your writing or your approach to journalism?
So I would say, so in college, one of my majors was actually, my concentration was in sports journalism, was what my training was. So I took a feature writing class at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, which is now IU Indianapolis. But it was a combination of it was like an urban campus of the two, which was great because I was near all the newspapers for internships in downtown Indy. But I took a feature writing class with Chris Lamb. And that really taught me about how to, edit interviews and write concisely and really like kind of trim the fat away from stories. Like there are stories that don't need to be 2,000 words long. And I mean, when I started out as a reporter, I was very much in the mindset of, I did all these interviews and, every quote needs to go in. And it's really a matter of like finding, just because you did the interviews doesn't mean like all that material needs to go in. So he was great about really telling me how to streamline stories. And then Malcolm Moran, who runs the Sports Capital Journalism program at IUPUI, IUI, gave me the opportunity to go out to California and cover the Rose Bowl for a week. I wrote something like 12 stories in a week. Had, the same access as professional reporters. I got to cover Indiana Fever games, Indiana Pacers games, and it was really being thrown into these environments. Like I was sitting alongside the journalists for like the Indianapolis Star and like other outlets and having the exact same access. And it was really just like learning by doing. So, I mean, sports journalism is also just great training for writing fast and, writing on deadline because you're filing like when the final buzzer sounds, you're filing that initial story. So it's great for really learning how to write fast and accurately. And it's great training and I'm always surprised how many people at the Times also have these sports backgrounds, especially when I was a reporting fellow for the culture desk. It was like, hey, all these other people kind of have worked in sports at some point too. So that was particularly great training for what I do now.
Tom Jolly, who I mentioned earlier, was a sports editor. So that's and he's done some great over the last year or so, if not longer. He's actually moved into sports photography as as a hobby on the side. So it's been great to see his posts on social media. Chris fills in. It's a museum of the city of New York. Which I was thinking it might be, but I thought he was somewhere else earlier. We were actually at the Museum of the City of New York going back several years. Stefan might remember, it might have been 2019. I interviewed, we did a Sree Sunday New York Times read-along. Sree was there. I was producing it. We interviewed Stefan Kaplan at the Museum of the City of New York. He had several photographs, I think, on display. Patricia was asking, did you ever go back to interview that professor?
Like for a story or an article or something?
Yeah.
No, I haven't. But I mean, I always am happy to, shout out the people that have been influential to me. So
yeah, absolutely. Let's go back. There are a couple of other articles we want to walk through. This one was an interview with the voice behind Moana. Tell us about that interview.
Yeah, so this was the case, for a lot of stories that I do about film and TV, the actors are out in Hollywood or living in Los Angeles, which makes sense because, that's where those industries are kind of based. But she is performing in a Broadway show here at the moment. So it was exciting because, I get to do this interview in person, which is always better, as I'm sure you can guess. So I met her the first night that she was back in Cabaret. And it was a really, really fun conversation. She'd just come from an outdoor photo shoot during a cold snap. So we were both kind of, warming up over these little mini pots of tea. So it was a great setting. And I was just amazed, how easy she was to talk to. She was really like a person who's, she's like, somewhat famous. Like you would recognize like her voice, but you're not going to recognize her if she's just like walking around. I think she said walking around Walmart. Like I could still go buy beans at Walmart and people like won't recognize me. They'll be like, oh, your voice sounds familiar. Like, do I know you from somewhere? But she's one of those people that's just like, she's famous, but she's very down to earth. And she's someone that's done some extraordinary things, but doesn't have an ego or anything like that. So it was a really fun conversation. And I think that I'm always happy when that kind of comes through in the story too, because you can see by her responses that she's just like, she's delighted to be where she's at. She's delighted to be doing work that she loves. So that was a really fun conversation.
I wanted to show the online version as well. because it features this kind of B-roll video of her with a softer focus and kind of an interesting style. Did you have any input on that, or did you work with the video team to put this together?
So one thing I always tell people when publicists will ask about shoots or photography is I have nothing to do with that side of things. So I'm always happy. I mean, it's one of the best parts about working for the Times is having, these great resources of visual editors and photographers who do think about these things and, come up with these beautiful layouts for stories and photography and video. So it's always like I just write the thing and then I get to see what creative brilliance the photographer and the videographers have come up with for a story. So I can take no credit for that side of things whatsoever, but it's wonderful to have these resources for the stories that I put together.
I mean, it's always great to have the additional space for photographs and in the online edition. But I see this video and there's just so much to love about this. The slight out of focus. You can see it's in the same place where they did some of the photographs, but it has an old timey. I mean, this could have been almost like a sepia black and white type video, and she could have been like a starlet from the 30s or something. It's really interesting. Really great to see that kind of thing.
Yeah, I had no idea, going in that they were going to shoot video, but I mean, recently the Times has really been kind of experimenting with, video on the homepage and video and stories. So it's been really fun to kind of get the chance to work with people on that.
Absolutely. So there's another article we want to talk about that is that looks better. There are a few that look good online. One is this article about Sunset Boulevard, which is a musical. You've seen it several times, and you wrote about a separate article about how you've seen it several times and seen new things. But this article in particular is about the I guess it's a 6-minute piece that the sequence that they do outside. They not just break that fourth wall, they obliterate it and move the whole production to the street. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this was something I saw the show for the first time in London last year. And as soon, it's a sequence that opens the top of the second act when they sing the title number, which is normally sung by the character played by Tom Francis, the screenwriter Joe Gillis. Usually when it's staged, he just sings it alone on stage, like as a solo, like meditative number for the audience. But in this one, what they do is, like you said, it's a 6-minute production. It starts backstage in his dressing room, and there's like a 3-minute silent sequence. As you know, they're going down from his dressing room to the bottom of the theater, and he's stopping by other characters' dressing rooms, and he's meeting like an Andrew Lloyd Webber, who's the composer of the show, cut out in the hallway, and he's like high-fiving a chimp. And then just when you think he's, going to walk on stage to sing the number, he goes outside the theater. And then 3 minutes of this basically happens on the street. So, I was curious, what all goes into this, because they have to stop traffic because he crosses the road. And, it's like, how are they keeping him in sync with the orchestra? And how are they getting like a clear sound on his microphone on this busy street? What happens if there's like a blizzard or something? So it was kind of just like thinking about what are all the behind the scenes preparations that have to go into pulling this out outside every night. And there's the camera woman that films the entire sequence. It's like she's, going at like a jogging pace while carrying this camera that weighs as much as like a toddler and holding it awkwardly in front of her. So it's like, how does she not like trip over the pavement? So there are all these extraordinary things that have to go into pulling this off every single night. And so I really wanted to take readers, behind the scenes of, like you see here in this video, like you see her carrying the camera. Obviously, you don't see that when you're on stage because when you're watching it in the theater, it's projected on a big screen at the front. So you're watching what's being streamed like from the camera woman's name is Shayna from her camera. So you're kind of like, is this live? Like at first you just think it's recorded, like, oh, they filmed this once and they play it every night. But then when I saw it in London, he like grabbed an umbrella when he went outside because it was raining. And then you saw people like lined up to watch. And I was like, oh, wow, they're doing this live every night. So it's one of those fascinating New York stories where you can talk to all these people about, how did they get permission to do this? How does it come together behind the scenes? I put it in the headline. I forget how many people are involved in this, but it was like 60 some people that are involved in pulling off this thing like every single night. So it was a ton of reporting, a ton of fascinating questions over a couple months. And then the photographer and videographer really kind of brought it to life in this format where, again, you can see it's a silent sequence at the beginning part in the theater, but in our videos, you can, hear the camera woman's assistant like counting out the steps for her and telling her, what's happening beneath her feet that she can't see. And you can hear Tom like talking to the chimp behind the scenes. So it was a really, really fun story that I'm super happy with how it turned out.
When you worked on this piece, obviously you did the writing the way you mentioned earlier, but was there any input in terms of getting video? It almost seemed like this piece screamed, you have to get video of this sequence. Like this is too good not to show on video.
Yeah, I mean, we always knew that we wanted to get video. And then, so because I'd seen the show before, like I actually did have some, I mean, I didn't have input on like the actual like capturing of this, but I came up with like a shot list for the photographer. Like, these are like, because it's a really quick sequence that flashes by. Like I watched it, I think 4 separate times, but I was like, okay, so these are the moments that I definitely am going to, interview people or ask questions about that we definitely want to get photos of, because again, it goes by so fast. So you have to balance like, I want to get video of this part and I want to get photos this time that I watch it. So, credit obviously to our photographer who watched it several times and went and got, backstage video and photography. And it was really thinking about, like, how do we match like what text I have, what photos and video they have. So it was a very collaborative process as far as like this one goes. Because again, it's matching it with something that's flashes by so quickly with like, do we want the photo of this one? Do we want the video of this one? So yeah.
That makes sense. Another article, we referenced it earlier, and Jonathan shared a few comments about it. Your piece, your guide to New York City's holiday windows, which again, I'm showing online because of the video, because of the interactive nature of this. Again, I want to remind folks that Sarah Bahr is our guest. She's a senior editor on the flexible editing desk. And in her spare time, again, help us understand how this is. This is not your job in terms of writing these articles, much less the Times Insider, but you make time to do this?
Yeah, definitely. So I work full time on the editing desk or the flexible editing desk. So, I'm working 5 days a week. I'm off Sunday, Monday. So, a lot of times it can be confusing when I'm talking to, publicists. I mean, pretty much everyone in the theater world now knows that like I have like a separate full-time job. But, initially I would be like, oh, I can't do that day. I'm working. And they're like, what? You're working? But wait, isn't reporting your job? I'm like, no, like I have an editing job. So basically I have to do all the reporting things when I'm not at my editing job. Like they don't overlap. So basically like I don't have free time is what happens. But again, I love the work that I do. I always tell people, it's not like war reporting, it's culture reporting. So it's fun
Sure.
to, see all the theater and film and get to talk to people. And again, because like I'm not a reporter, like reporting is not my full-time job. I am a reporter. But like basically I pitch most of the things that I write. So I really get to dive into topics that I'm interested in. And really get the chance to explore things that I'm curious about. So it's something that I really enjoy, which helps make balancing everything a lot easier, even if it is challenging at times.
And that makes sense in terms of particularly your coverage of theater and arts. That's obviously stuff you can do in the evenings and weekends. You mentioned yesterday you actually were not out on a Saturday evening. And thank you again for all your help in putting this show together, sharing PDFs and going back and forth on email. But typically you would, and this is your day off. Thank you for joining us on your day off. But on Saturday, what would you typically be doing on a Saturday?
So my Saturdays are actually pretty predictable. So I work our late Saturday night shift at
Oh,
5.
okay.
My shift starts at 5:30 p.m. on the flexible editing desk, which actually works out well because Saturday is one of 2 days a week in theater when there are two shows. So I can see a matinee at 2 and feel like I still got a full day of theater going in before I go to work, and then I'm editing at night. So that works out well. And
Wow.
on Flex, like my shifts tend to vary somewhat from week to week. So sometimes I'll work night shifts and do reporting things during the day, and sometimes I'll work day shifts and be seeing shows at night. So kind of having a varied schedule can be helpful reporting wise.
That's great. So let's take a look at that the holiday window display. So this is your guide to the different stores. Many retail stores around the country decorating for holiday season involves inflatables, pre-made wreaths, and classic red and green ornaments. But for the department stores in New York City, it's a little bit different. We'll just scroll through real quickly. When did you do the reporting on this?
So this took place probably over about a month or so. But it was really, talking to the designers. I talked to them before the windows went up when they were still coming together. About, it's always fun to talk to people about the themes every year and how specific items are made. Like especially in the Bergdorf Goodman window this year, they had a photo of this, the praying mantis. I mean, one of my questions when I saw that, I was like, A, how many rhinestones are there on that thing? And B, like, are they like doing this by hand, or how are they getting on there? Is that glue? What is happening? And it was a team of like 3 people over 6 weeks that were hand setting like more than 100,000 or something of these. And I was like, wow. So I mean, these holiday windows, we tend to do some kind of story on them every year, just because they're really kind of a unicorn in New York. Like there are only 4 department stores left that basically do them, and it's all of this care that goes into these things. I mean, in a world where so much of marketing now takes place on social media and online, like it's kind of like print journalism. They're really investing in these very tactile in-person displays that are a tradition for a lot of people. And it's fascinating to talk every year with the designers about how they're thinking about these things, because they start thinking about next year's windows in January or February, like right after these come down. They're like, okay, what are we doing next year? And so many different people are involved in these, and people have been working on these in some cases for a long time. So it's just cool to think about how they're sourcing all the materials. Like Bergdorf Goodman for their taxi cab window this year, literally they went to junkyards in the Bronx and Brooklyn to find old taxi cab parts. So there are all these kind of fun Easter eggs that you wouldn't necessarily know when you just see these on the street, that are super fun to share with readers every year. So I always really kind of enjoy doing this story.
And this is you do this on a regular basis?
Yeah, so it's not me necessarily every year. I didn't do it last year, but I did the year before when Elton John performed outside Saks. But someone from Styles pretty much every year is doing this. Normally we would go to the big Saks light show, which they didn't do this year. But yeah, it's talking to the people at Saks and Bloomingdale's and Bergdorf Goodman and Macy's about kind of how these displays are coming together, and it's delightful every year. So we're always trying to do something on it.
And again, a great job. This is where I think it's always great to show things online. As much as this show is a homage to print and to the New York Times journalism in general, but it's great to be able to show these online takes on this show. So here's a Wicked wardrobe at Bloomingdale's. We saw Wicked last week, and my daughter's going again with a friend this weekend. So this is definitely resonates. But these are some great pictures and video from that article. Jonathan is sharing lots of memories of the window displays. Lord and Taylor's was usually the best, but there was Best and Company, Bonwit Teller, Altman's, so many others now long gone. You said there are only 4 or 5 that do it now?
Yeah, there are 4 that still do them. Yeah, Lord and Taylor's doesn't, as far as I'm aware of. So yeah, it's really Saks, Bloomingdale's, Bergdorf Goodman, and Macy's.
And another memory that he shared of holiday windows: one year windows in New York would be recycled to other cities the following year. An Altman's holiday window display might turn up at Jordan Marsh, just to pick 2 department stores that no longer exist. So that's there might be an interesting history behind that. Sujana Chandrasekhar says that it's really special to see the holiday windows every year. I missed the Lord and Taylor ones. They had great themes. And my mom shared earlier, you're multi-talented, write amazing articles on a range of different topics. Great guest.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Certainly. There's at least one other article we want to talk about that you wrote, which is online today, and we'll talk about the news piece of it in just a minute. But you wrote a piece, a Times Insider column that is online today and in print tomorrow about the Notre Dame, scrubbing up for a peek at the resuscitated Notre Dame Cathedral. And we'll take a look at that article shortly in the print paper. It's a big display photo on the front page of the paper. But tell me about this piece with Michael Kimmelman, the architecture critic for the Times.
Yeah, Michael is always fascinating to talk to. But this is actually this is Megan's idea, who's our editor of Times Insider, and she was curious, because he got a behind the scenes peek at Notre Dame, and he'd presumably visited that place, dozens of times before. So she was like, what was it like for him? And then I was curious too. And then it turns out that he was basically wearing a scrub suit, kind of like a hazmat suit, when he was visiting. So it was a little different from, the normal experience of waiting outside with the crowds of tourists. And he really got this look as the restoration was happening, because I was asking him, what was going on around you? And he was like, oh, there were beeping trucks, people were moving carts, there are people restoring these paintings. So, he was like, it was really a miraculous experience to kind of watch all of this, coming together, because he got to see it over the summer. So it wasn't finished yet, because if you aren't aware, Notre Dame reopened this weekend.
Yeah.
It was really just talking to him about, what the experience was like, kind of being in that space again after the fire. And, talking about what was going through his head when he first got the news that it was burning, back in 2019. He's like, I was on a way to a piano lesson. And at first, when Michael Slackman, our editor in International, called me, he was like, it's made of stone. Like, that can't burn down. Like, that's not right. And he was like, check Twitter, man. Like, it is burning. So then he went into column mode and, produced something. But yeah, that first reaction of disbelief, I think a lot of people shared. Like, that can't burn. Like, it's this iconic landmark.
We'll take a look at the print edition in just a few minutes. But what's nice, again, online is that you have this article on the reopening with links to the latest, what to know photos, Notre Dame Reborn, a miraculous restoration, and how to visit all across the top. Which is great. Just a great feature from the Times. I want to do a quick hello to Ellen, watching from New York City. Ellen, thank you for joining us. And Eve Botello, watching from North Carolina. Thank you. So we definitely have folks watching from all over. If you're just joining us, Sarah Bahr is our guest. She is a senior editor on the flexible editing desk by day, sometimes by night, depending on her shift, where she edits content across the Times, whether it's for online, for social media, for columns, etc. And then in her free time, and I still have trouble kind of figuring out how this works, in her free time, on top of her day job, she writes about theater, film, TV, music, visual art, pop culture, parties, and nightlife. And my favorite, the Times Insider columns that she's written, almost more than 100 of them over the last 4 years. So we had just an incredible conversation with her. We are going to move to the paper in just a moment. But when we're done with the show, I definitely encourage you to watch the first part, the first half hour or so, with the interview portion with Sarah. And you'll be able to watch that on the same channels you're watching, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on our Digimentors website. Just a few minutes after we go off the air, you'll be able to watch it from the very beginning. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. It certainly will be worth watching. More folks are joining us. Diana Rohini is watching from California. Diana, thank you for joining. And Arlene Schulman is watching from Inwood in New York, on the upper reaches of Manhattan. And Arlene is a former guest on the show as well. So thank you, Arlene. So with that, we're going to switch gears again. And just as a reminder, these were some of the articles that we looked at with Sarah. We looked at her One Reporter, 100 Behind the Scenes Stories, her interview with the voice behind Moana, her Sunday Routine article with Catherine Russell. And we actually didn't get to the article about the Thanksgiving Day parade when you followed a New York Times reporter along the route. Let's go ahead and cover that, because that was too good to not share. So we'll go ahead and bring that up for folks, and then we'll go to the paper. Just a quick little detour. So let's take a look at that right now. So this past the barricades at the Thanksgiving Day parade. So on your now, would that have been a day off that Thursday?
So actually, I did work Thanksgiving, but the parade is so early in the morning that basically I did all this before my flex shift. So I worked a double shift where I did this reporting thing in the morning, because again, this parade happens at like 8:30 or something. Then I worked a flex evening shift afterward. But wow. Yeah, I mean, it was a big day, intense day. So I definitely had a busy Thanksgiving. I was glad. It was pretty rainy that day too, so it was my first time that I'd gotten the chance to watch this in person. So I was glad that it kind of started letting up near the end. But it was a pretty rainy reporting day. But Sarah was game for this too, so it was fun to see all the giant balloons. Because this is very much, I mean, I'm sure you can tell from TV, it's such a spectacle, and it's such it's something that people have grown up watching. So it's really cool. Because I was curious, like, how does it work? How does she get special access? So we had basically City of New York like press badges that let us walk like on the other side of these barriers you see here. Like we were literally walking like right beside these giant balloons and floats. I was like, wow, like I didn't realize she actually got to walk along the parade route. So she's, stopping and interviewing people. I mean, that one of the fun behind the scenes things, it's like she's like ducking under this like emergency services cart to file to her editor because it's, it's raining. So she has to find somewhere dry. She's like, can I go into the porta potty? Can I like duck under this cart? So it was kind of all these like fun behind the scenes logistics of how this reporting actually happens, because she writes the story every year. She volunteers to write it every year. So it was something that I'd kind of had on my mind that I wanted to do for a while, where I was like, it would be really cool to see like behind the scenes of how she kind of pulls this off every year.
Cool. And Sarah has been a guest on our show as well. So it's great to have your, some of the people that you're referencing are folks that we've interviewed and talked to. But this, reading your article, kind of almost like a TikTok of that morning of when she went to the beginning of when she started the coverage, watching the floats go by, ducking in to get a hot chocolate at a friend's place at one point, going in and out of the barriers. You did a great job of bringing the reader to the parade that morning, and so just love the work. Thank you, Sarah. Absolutely great.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. So as I was mentioning, we are going to be switching to the paper. So I will step over to where I have the newspaper set up, and we will turn the New York Times cam on there, and we will start this conversation. And even before we do that, a couple more comments that were coming in. Jonathan is talking about there were at least a dozen department stores that had Christmas windows when I was growing up. There may have been more. That there are only 4 now is rather sad. It's, if not depressing. And Ellen had a comment about Notre Dame. I'm not Catholic, but I used to attend services in Notre Dame when I was a student in Paris. Such a gorgeous cathedral, magnificent space, lofty, I guess. And then, of course, a melange from Bertillon. and hi to you, Neil. Cold here. John Lee, our most recent guest. Great to see how the sausage is made. Absolutely. And Arlene saying, I love his work. Not sure who the reference was to, Arlene. If you can clarify that, we definitely would appreciate it. But with that, let's go ahead and jump into the paper. And Sarah, if there's anything that strikes your fancy, an article that you want to comment on, please do so. This display story, and again, I mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is obviously the print edition of the Sunday paper. It's printed at 27 plants across the country, printing plants. I'm obviously here in Washington D.C. From when I went to College Point and talked with Mike Connors, got the background in terms of like the early editions that get printed across the country for Sunday. It could go out as early as like 2 p.m. on Saturday, but the late editions, maybe 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, to get delivered to Philadelphia. If there's breaking news, they might hold it a little bit, particularly in the years past for election night coverage. But breaking news this morning that you won't see in the print edition: Assad, Prime Minister Bashar Assad, has fled Syria, and that's all over the New York Times homepage. So we'll take a look at that again before this show is over. But let's focus on the print edition of the New York Times. That display picture is Notre Dame. In a little over 5 years, 2,000 laborers have prepared Notre Dame Cathedral for its grand reopening. Coverage begins on page 13, which is interesting. The leads: tycoons of tech steer transition for Trump team. Many conflicts seen, touching nearly every department, despite little experience. And then national chain of drug clinics deals in deceit. Acadia fakes records, Times inquiry finds. It's interesting. Here's the article about Syria. Al-Assad at risk as rebels surge. A strategic city is said to be under attack. That was, of course, yesterday's news, as it were. And then this is the article about Notre Dame, how a centuries-old Parisian jewel was reborn, a daunting deadline to save Notre Dame. There was a major fire there 5 years ago. We'll take a look at this special from New York Times Cooking, making sweet, sweet memories. Lemony turmeric and boozy almond add to the flavor of our Cookie Week recipes. It's a special section we'll take a look at. Another article on the front page: influencer versus influencer. Can a vibe be stolen? The oversized beige cable knit sweater, the center parted hair, the right knee pointed out, creating a curve at her left hip. Practically every detail in the photo, right down to the matching short set, looks similar to Sydney Gifford. So did the woman posed in front of the nondescript white wall. That's going to be an interesting article to look at. Here's an interesting piece that the South Korean leader who declared martial law survived impeachment vote in assembly. I assumed that he was going to be kicked out of office the way that all that went down, but he survived that vote, which is interesting. Let's take a look at the front page of each section, and then we'll go back to the front section in just a moment. This is the Sunday opinion. Marco Rubio's elasticity helped him navigate the Trump years. What could it mean for him as Secretary of State? And how should President Biden spend his final weeks in office? 5 opinion writers have some suggestions. And then the arguments in the Supreme Court case suggest a devastating decision awaits trans kids and their families. If I'm not mistaken, Sarah, in your article, when you wrote about spending time on the print hub, you made a specific reference to using headlines that reference the Supreme Court. That if you don't have space, I think you said you can use High Court or justices or something like that if you need to shorten it, right?
Yeah, because sometimes when you have the vertical columns, especially on the front page, you'll have to do like top court or high court. sometimes, again, there's like last names that are long, or like Supreme Court doesn't always fit in the columns. So you have to come up with, I mean, it can be frustrating. Sometimes you're just like, it's like one letter too many, and you're like, like, can't we just, shrink the font? But can't. So it's coming up with, it's kind of fun. I mean, not always on deadline, but when you're like, okay, like I have like 3 minutes to come up with some solution before this needs to go. But
Sure.
yeah, it can be a creative problem solving.
And that the Sunday opinion, the cover image you can see. So this is, if you look at the full section, the headline: "Where's the next nuclear threat? Look up." That's interesting that that's an opinion piece, but we'll take a look at that a little bit later. And we'll just set this aside. Let's see what else. Sunday business. So again, with these full page covers, don't necessarily know what the article is about until you flip it over. The Gumshoe Who Built a Real Estate Empire: The 2-Decade 16-Book Journey of Easy Rollins. And then here's definitely something I'm interested in. What if charitable giving shouldn't be optimized? Maybe doing good and doing the most are both lacking. This is, I worked at United Way for about 9 years, at a United Way in Washington State, and then at their national office in DC. So I'm very interested in kind of charitable giving and how it's being reported on, and this idea of it shouldn't be optimized. That's the whole point, is that you want to get the most bang for your buck. So that'll be interesting to see what they're thinking about, what they're writing about there. Let's move on. Sunday styles. A lot of your work is in the style section, right? Whiplash: Chaotic Love in a Fishbowl. Zoe Castan, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, is trying to move on after her entanglement with Hunter Biden. So that's interesting. And then a article in the bottom: Loft helps Nick Cave find his way. He's back out on the road, connecting with fans and working through his grief. Arts and leisure, another home for your work, right, Sarah?
Yeah, definitely. Always loved the Sunday section. So it's really a showcase for kind of the best photography from the week. And, you get these beautiful full page layouts. So it's always fun to read.
The expansion of the immersive: a Japanese company melding art with technology wades into deep waters. That's definitely interesting. And here's that special New York Times cooking section we'll take a look at. The sweetest of them all: 7 sublime cookies for a joyous holiday season. Now I'm going to make an assumption here. This is the kind of thing my mother-in-law would be interested in. She bakes holiday cookies every year. I keep insisting that chocolate chip cookies should be a holiday cookie, and she keeps fighting me on it. I don't know why. I just want chocolate chip cookies. That's all I want. Holiday books from the Book Review. And then the New York Times Magazine: How Nuclear Escalation Spirals Out of Control. So it's interesting, that there's an article about the nuclear war in the opinion section. But this kind of subhead: The Most Dangerous Game. So that's an interesting piece. And then there's a T Magazine as well. The Last Movie Star. Robert Pattinson has been a celebrity for much of his life, but he does it his way. And that's, of course, Robert Pattinson first broke through in the Twilight series, which we recently rewatched with our daughter. Were you a fan of Twilight, Sarah?
I was, in middle school. Definitely read the books. I haven't really kind of revisited that in a few years, but I watched all the movies, so I'm Twilight savvy.
Team Edward or Team Jacob?
I was Team Edward.
Team Jacob for me. But we can agree to disagree. Let's take a look at the front page, front section, the A-book, as it were. There's that display photo of Notre Dame, which is great. And we'll keep an eye. I want to just say hi. Dr. Tachi is watching on YouTube, usually in Florida, if I'm not mistaken. So Dr. Tachi, thank you for watching. And that's great. So let's see. Now we talked about that special section from New York Times Cooking. Megan, who has been a guest on the show, she joined us a few years ago when she redesigned pages A2 and A3. And you said she's the editor for Times Insider?
Yeah, for the A2, A3 section, which is what you're looking at, that spread there that includes Times Insider and has all these kind of other fun features too, like the facts that are in the paper. You see the map on the right, which is like where journalists are reporting from, top streaming headlines, here to help. So yeah, there was this redesign a few years ago where she led really kind of a rethinking of what should go on these pages, which are kind of like what's the cliff notes, or what are the kind of fun things that are in the paper that day. So it's a really fun section.
And we had her on the show shortly after the redesign. And she walked us through that whole thing. And we definitely highlight these different sections when we do our show. But this is the Times Insider piece, the story behind the story. And preparation for Cookie Week from the New York Times Cooking begins in June. The week requires dozens of cookie batches and lots of teamwork. The behind-the-scenes mess of Cookie Week. 7 cookies, months of preparation, and 1 week of delicious cookie domination. Megan wrote this article herself. You were telling me about the photography for this section, that they actually leave space for the text overlays.
Yeah, I mean, I only know this from, reading the Insider, but one of the fun, Easter eggs that Megan got when she was reporting this is that you can see there on the right, where you have that rightmost photo, the little bit of text in there, was when the people were thinking about, photographing this for the print layout. They were arranging cookies and they would leave these gaps in them for where the print editor could put text in. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating to think about, like how big is this text going to be? Like how big of a space should we leave? So I was like, that's something that's really cool. Like I never would have thought about that. But of course you kind of need to leave space because you're not going to write, on the cookie. So yeah, it's one of those like fascinating things that you don't think about.
Absolutely. We always take a look at the Dateline section in here. And this week, at least they're reporting from many more places than just this 4, but these are the highlights from Canada. I'm not going to try and pronounce where that is, but you can see it on the map. It's certainly up in the Arctic, situated atop thawing permafrost. The Arctic hamlet of, not going to try and pronounce it, is sinking. And the reporter reported that its Indigenous residents may become Canada's first climate refugees, which is interesting. They're also reporting from Michigan, from Angola, and South Korea this week. I am a particular fan of In Times Past, this column by David Dunlap, who is the historian of the Times, exploring an artifact from the archives of the New York Times. And this is a presidential picture conundrum. Outside the boardroom at the New York Times headquarters above is a portrait gallery with every United States president since Theodore Roosevelt. Each picture is autographed or personalized in some way. The 45th president signed his photo to Arthur Schulzberger Jr., who was then the publisher. Arthur, great being with you, MAGA. And the 46th president signed his portrait, New York Times, a free press is the rock upon which democracy is built. Keep the faith. So I actually had the chance, we interviewed Jake Silverstein in his office on a Wednesday afternoon when the Times Magazine was shipped back to the paper. This is, it was going to come out the following Sunday. And after that interview, we actually got a tour of the museum upstairs, which was just fascinating. I absolutely loved walking through that. I still want to do a show focused on the museum, and need to just coordinate with David. We want to do a do a walkthrough with him, tape that early during the week some point, and then that Sunday do the show and show that video. So just need to work out logistics on that. So here is the international section. Iran makes a dramatic leap to produce near bomb grade fuel. Rail Force One special trains shuttle leaders across Ukraine. A special article about that. We always take a look at the ads as well. The full page ad. This is a full page color ad, and I've never heard of this. Fizzy Up, shelf ready boxes. This is for lemon lime soda. So this Pratt.com. So I guess they're actually advertising the boxes. I'm wondering whether that's just a mock-up for a soda. Interesting that shelf ready boxes would get a full color, full page ad. Here is an article with water scarce. Athens revives an ancient aqueduct. And then, let's see, conversion therapy suit earns rare win in China. Bright spot for transgender rights abroad. We have enough trouble with that here in the States. In terms of, just to be clear, conversion therapy suit earns rare win. I was referring to the fact that transgender rights are being challenged in several locations in the States. It's good to see a victory abroad. Didn't want anyone to think that I felt concerned about trans rights. Here is a full-page centerfold ad for Bonjour, Lady of Paris, Merci World. So this is a great job in terms of the ad team. 5 years after a devastating fire, Notre Dame de Paris Cathedral opens her doors once again. Autodesk honors the architects, artisans, engineers, and builders from around the world who work tirelessly to bring Our Lady back to life. We're proud to have contributed our digital modeling technology to support this historic restoration. And there's a little bit of a text on the top corner. Notre Dame, built between 1163 and 1859, burned April 15, 2019, reopened today, December 8, 2024. But just a great ad, actually. And this is the coverage with pageantry and dignitaries. France unveils a reborn Notre Dame, a cathedral at the heart of French culture and history. And that's a picture from the inside. The greatness of this cathedral is inseparable from everyone, President Emmanuel Macron said on Saturday during a ceremony to celebrate Notre Dame reopening 5 years after a catastrophic fire. Here's more coverage, some sketches. How Notre Dame, 8 centuries old, was reborn. Stabilizing the cathedral, a deep cleaning. It all came together in Paris. Guilds from across France, finding oak trees and limestone. Really great in-depth coverage of the times. Here's more international articles. And, again, al-Assad's rule is at risk as Syrian rebels surge. Syrian rebel leader says he may favor a political solution eventually. At stake in Syria fight domination of Middle East. How quickly things turn there. Again, breaking news this morning. If you look online, we'll just stay here for a moment. Assad has fled Damascus, and the Syrian government has fallen to the rebels. Things moved very quickly overnight, after at least the print paper went to press. So here are some national stories. To reach neglected voters, Harris staffers went rogue. It's a little bit about a how to get out the vote effort that was organized out of a Dunkin' Donuts. More on politics. Tycoons in Silicon Valley steer transition for Trump's team. Texas GOP drives out its speaker amid a feud. And here's an interesting article, Breaking Silence. Walt says he felt a little surprised that Trump won. And one thing I always point out in New York, the A-book, you can print up to 40 pages, I think, at College Point. So this is one section, but outside of New York, most of the presses can only do 22 pages. So the rest of the section comes up almost like as a subsection, and it kind of highlights these articles. These articles get a little bit more visibility than they would have otherwise. I always think that's interesting. So which section should we look at next, Sarah?
Take your pick. Let's see.
Should we go with styles or arts?
Yeah, let's go with arts. Let's try that one.
Let's check out arts. What do we have here? Here we go, arts and leisure. This is the one that has the Japanese technology piece on the cover, the expansion of the immersive. A Japanese company melding art with technology wades into deep waters. So this is a headliner. Juliette Binoche's method acting has perks. And then there's an inside culture section here. An article about Jay Wegman. The Q, what people are. I'm a food reporter, a video host, and interim restaurant critic for the New York Times. I'm a child of travel-loving Indian immigrants and 1990s and early aughts romantic comedies. The Wedding Planner and 10 Things I Hate About You Forever. My music tastes are so random and eclectic that the Spotify rap algorithm struggles to categorize my listening habits. Here are 5 things I've recently heard, seen, read, and watched by Priya Krishna. That's interesting. Interesting column there. So what else do we have here? So theater, this focus on many Mama Roses, all larger than life. There's a piece about Bernadette Peters. Oh, the different Mama Roses. Bernadette Peters, Patti LuPone, Imelda Stanton, Tyne Daly, Ethel Merman back in 1959, Betty Buckley. Are you familiar with the Gypsy?
So I've never seen it live before. I have watched a bootleg of the Patti LuPone Laura Benanti one. So I'm looking forward to seeing it in January. I love that because Ben Brantley wrote this article, so he's the former Times chief theater critic. So I love that he shows up every once in a while with a feature, like he did a Merrily We Roll Along feature earlier too. So I love that he still pops up in the pages from time to time, because this was a fun one with all the gypsies that he's most of which he's seen, if not all of them.
And then this one is Recalling the Creation of Grace. Ronald Brown's fervent work celebrates 25 years and enjoys the new production. So this is dance. Wicked. This is what a juggernaut looks like. Have you seen Wicked?
I have. I went to an early screening for it, and I'd seen the stage musical a few times. So it was really fascinating to see, because I was really curious, because part 1 is like 2 hours and 40 minutes long or something. Like it's longer than the entire stage musical is. So it was like, what kind of new stuff did they add? How is this possibly longer than the whole musical? So yeah, it's been fun to see how people react to it too, that like haven't seen the stage show, because obviously I'm very immersed in the theater world. So it's kind of fascinating to see it permeate into the larger culture beyond just like theater people.
We saw it in Seattle. We've been in DC now for 9 years, but we saw it in Seattle something like 12, 13 years ago. And it was great to see the movie again and see it with my daughter. Emily is 11. Took a friend. Always fun to see it through her kid's eyes. And a great story as well. If folks haven't seen it, definitely encourage you to check it out. On television, These Spies Are Messed Up As We Are. This is in several new thriller series. International espionage comes second to Agents' Inner Angst. Do you have time for TV with your multiple jobs and all the theater work?
So the TV I do have time for is usually related to a story that I'm writing. So like if I'm watching screeners for something, I'm probably either thinking about writing about it or assigned to write about it. So I don't get to watch a ton of stuff that I'm not writing about directly. But there's some stuff that I do make time for. So
yeah, great. And then this is a continuation of that piece. We have, let's see, solve your trickiest gifting puzzles with the Google Holiday 100. So Google Shopping getting into the crossword mix. And that's a good time to mention that next week, our guest is going to be Deb Amlin. Deb Amlin is a columnist with New York Times Games. And one of her jobs, she's written 5,000 columns, but one of her focus is to helping people do the New York Times crossword, giving them hints, suggestions, understanding how to approach the puzzles. So we'll have a great conversation with her next week. And Megan, you mentioned that you've actually worked with the New York Times Games and Dev, I think, in particular, right? From the flexible editing side?
Yeah, so the flexible editing desk handles edits of the wordplay and the crossword columns. So we get to edit some of the game's content, which is always kind of fun. She's definitely a regular user of Flex. So it's kind of, again, it's a fun mix of things that Flex handles. There's, breaking news and hard news and world events. And also, we edit like the Learning Network content, which is like educational materials from the Times and games content. So it's a great mix of things.
And you said she's a user of Flex. So do people voluntarily say, hey, I'd like some help, or how does that work?
So it's a channel in Slack, which is like our internal messaging platform. And people will submit basically an edit request form where they'll put, the link to the story, when they need it back, or when they want it back, what they want done to it, whether they want it published when it's done, or a playback, which is like a copy of changes that we've made sent to the reporter, whether they want us to schedule it for a certain time, whether they want us to hand it back. So yeah, basically they submit a request form, and then there's a staff of editors that monitor the channel at various times or in various staffing amounts, depending on the time of day. And then, yeah, we basically go through this queue of requests.
So it's not a necessary step in the process. It's a voluntary kind of, hey, would love your help.
So it's the process for editing at the Times is a necessary step to get 2 edits, but sometimes desks have like a dedicated staff of editors. So we help out with a lot of desks that, don't necessarily have like a dedicated staff of second editors. Or sometimes, like on weekends when there are fewer people working, like they may not always have an editor on hand, or if they're really busy. So basically we're like a team of like editors when they don't have someone around that can handle a second edit, or if it's late at night or something like that. So it's a necessary step in the process, but it's not necessarily always us, is basically how I would put it.
Got it. So here's I think this is the reference to that article on the cover, like a play area with lofty themes. A Japanese company expands its immersive installations, combining the metaphysical with a sugar rush of sensation. And then the outline here, if these exhibitions cannot reach an emotional height, then we have failed. So that's an interesting piece there. And it continues on this page. Immersive centers are like play areas with lofty themes, which is very similar to the headline on the first part of the section, first part of the article. And then close this section. I'll be interested in this. How 70s rockers burst into the 80s. Synths, drum machines, and flexibilities. Performers like ZZ Top, Yes, and Van Halen reinvented themselves for a new era. So that'll be worth checking out. And then here, the year pop stardom got supersized. In '84, albums by Prince, Madonna, and other stars altered the landscape. That's an interesting piece. This is clockwise from top left. In case people need the IDs, Cyndi Lauper, David Byrne, Bruce Springsteen, Tina Turner, Michael Jackson, and Madonna. That's going clockwise. So that's the arts section. And we're right at 9:58. So let's take a quick look at the New York Times cooking special. Sarah, if we can keep you on for just a few minutes past that. And then we'll close the show. This is the New York Times special. And we want to make sure that people see that. It's always fun to see what they do, particularly with the layout. And we talked about the Times Insider column, talked about how they did the photography to account for text. So we'll take a look at what they did inside. This is a gatefold, right? So you have the recipes here. And then when you open it up, if I can get that page at the bottom. This is even too big for my desk. It's going to fall up the side. But this is trying to get you the full view. This is a great poster. Now you can put this up on the wall. So this is, let's take a look at what we have here. Matcha and black sesame shortbread. Kind of hard to see the text on the left. Holiday Rocky Road, and that's the pictures here. So this is what we were talking about, right? When they laid out the cookies, they left space to put some text in that picture. They didn't stack them.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that fascinating to think about? They're just like thinking about
Yeah.
like how much text needs to go on this page, how big does the space need to be? Yeah.
You can see that little bit of space between the cookies here. This is the ginger cheesecake cookies, spaced out. The iced peppermint, which to me it's kind of a tease. They look like black and whites, but they're certainly not. I'm a big fan of black and whites. Also, my favorite are rainbow cookies, but that's again not a Christmas cookie. And then rum buttered almond cookies again with the space. So this is definitely worth checking out, and the recipes are on the top part here. What great! I just love the way they do the layout of these sections. And we actually had Kristen Chambro on the show about a year ago, I think it was. I'm not mistaken, she's the deputy editor for New York Times Cooking. And she walked us through some of these special sections that they do. So that those are the sections we were able to get to: cooking, arts and style, arts and leisure rather, and of course the A-book. But our guest has been Sarah Bahr, and it's been great to have you on the show, Sarah. Thank you so much for all that you shared today. I'll come back on camera with you. We will close out the show. Any final words for our viewers? Any thoughts in terms of your work, both on the Flexible Editing Desk and as writing the Times Insider column? Before that, I just want to bring in Dr. Tachi's comments. The 80s music is so interesting. MTV and the music video had a profound effect, and that's quite a spread for New York Times Cooking. And Patricia said yummy as well. So any thoughts about your work with Times Insider? Any final thoughts on that?
I mean, it's just such a privilege to be able to be part of the Times and to have all these conversations and to have this mix of, editing and reporting in my life that I do. So, yeah, I'm always excited to come to work.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. As a reminder, the show is produced by Digimentors, the social digital AI consultancy that Sree Sreenivasan set up several years ago. I'm proud to be a vice president of events and communications. Muckrack is our sponsor for the show. Thank you, Muckrack. And next week, Deb Amlin, a columnist for New York Times Games, will be our guest. I do want to give a special announcement as well. The show that I produce, the second and fourth Thursdays of the month, Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. Episode 20 is going to be on Thursday, December 12th. Shauna Presley-Vircher is our guest, Finding Happiness After Trauma. We've produced this show for several months now, Sarah, shining a light on mental health challenges, whether it's anxiety, depression, PTSD, bipolar. We've had therapists, we've had people sharing their own concerns on the show, and we're looking forward to another great show on Thursday with Shauna Presley-Vircher. My co-host, of course, for that show is Dawn Helmrich Newberg. For folks who are watching, if you missed the beginning, you definitely can catch the beginning of the show on the same channels that you're watching, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and our Digimentors website as soon as we're finished, just a few minutes after we finish the show. Patricia says thank you to Sarah and the entire New York Times Read Along production team. Thank you, Patricia, for joining us. And we will look forward to seeing everyone next week for another show. Thank you. And Sarah, thanks again for spending your Sunday morning with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.